Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Medicinal Plant Walk. This event is part of the 10th annual 2Rivers Festival that celebrates and appreciates the Speed and Aramasa rivers. Our hearty thanks to Zeiss Millicent for sharing her passion for our rivers with you, and thanks to all of you for attending this event. The festival is organized and run by volunteers and involves many community organizations. Please support these organizations that are doing good work in our community. Please also support our advertisers and our event sponsors, who are CFRU, Mike Schreiner, and Mickey Shepard, who made this event possible. You can see all our advertisers on our website. We have over 40 great events, so please have a look and RSVP to the ones that are of interest. This festival is a project of Wellington Water Watchers, and it is our hope that if we fall in love with our rivers, we will want to further protect them. We will be recording these events to share, and if you do not feel comfortable with that, please know that you can turn off your video. Okay, and I'll introduce Zeiss now. Zeiss is a fourth-year student of Dominion Herbal College studying clinical herbal therapy, and she's looking forward to opening a clinical herbal practice to offer one-on-one health consultations here in Guelph. Currently, Zeiss offers plant walks at various locations in Guelph, depending on COVID lockdowns, to share information about medicinal plants and empower people to improve their health while connecting with nature. And now, Zeiss, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm going to start with a quick, reminder that I am outside. You might have noticed that part. And so, I apologize for the video quality to live stream through my phone. It's a bit not a great video. And I am on headphones, so I will try my best to block the wind and not have noise. Do what we can. So a couple more intro statements. I know you guys have been amazingly patient as we sort through some tech stuff, and I just want to go through a few things before I get started. First and foremost, thank you for coming. Some of you came in after I already said thank you, and I'm just really excited that you're here, and I'm excited to hear your questions and maybe get to know you a bit through this. So you can put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute and interrupt if you prefer. Otherwise, disclaimers, this is an informational plant walk, so please do not consider this as any medical advice or any other medical information in that way. If you have questions about medical information, by all means consult a qualified licensed healthcare practitioner. I'm not liable for what you do with this information. So there's that disclaimer of legality considerations. Otherwise, as I go through, because I'm trained in herbal medicine as a clinical herbalist, sometimes I might get a bit too sciencey in terms of words and things. So if there's a word you don't know, please just ask. I will try to explain and not be sciencey as I go along. But yeah, so just feel free to ask for clarification. And otherwise, just a bit of a comment on foraging and or gathering wild plants, wildcrafting. So we're going to be talking about plants today, obviously. So I hope you're at the right session if you weren't expecting that surprise. So some considerations when you're gathering plants from the wild. One is where you're gathering it from. So here we are. For those of you who don't know the Guelph area, we're along the Speed River. And so depending where you are, the site that you're gathering plants from might have been, a past dump site or gravel extraction site or something. So there might be chemicals in the land. So being very aware of your location of plants. So ditches along roadsides might have the best looking medicinal plants, but they might have picked up, heavy metals or something. So being aware of location is important. Also, respect for the plants. They're not just here to be used for humans to just take, right? They have lives of their own. So being respectful, depending on your sense of spirituality, you might want to ask them permission first. And then also being respectful of the amount. So that's my third point on the foraging right now, is that depending how the plant grows, and I'll be talking about that a bit with different plants in terms of self-seeding, annual, perennial, stuff like that. You don't want to harvest too much necessarily to wipe out the plant population. Other animals depend on the plants. So being aware of that percentage. And if a plant is endangered, don't harvest it or harvest less of it. Whereas if a plant like garlic mustard is really invasive, then you could maybe go to town on harvesting. There's also a great garlic mustard flag event as part of the 2Rivers Festival in a week or two. So check it out. So that's my disclaimers. I'm going to try to do my best in acting tone and wind. This time back. So we're going to start with Motherwort. Okay, also new this year, I've put the flags in first. Isn't that exciting? So Motherwort is Leonurus cardiaca. And so this plant is a bitter. So in terms of flavor, the flavor is bitter. And in herbal medicine, we also call certain plants to be bitters because they taste bitter and they stimulate the digestive system. For instance, before you have a meal, if you take bitters, then it can help to stimulate the gastric secretions and get kind of the stomach turning and help with digesting the food. I'll talk a bit more about bitters as we move on, but I want to kind of get some plants under your belt here. So other things about Motherwort, I'm going to go for some information about harvesting. So this plant is perennial. It's actually one of the first plants up out of the winter. So these leaves, which to me are a little bit reminiscent of maple leaves, but they're really kind of veiny. You can tell my botany language is not a botanist. So this plant starts down low, and then it'll grow up to 2 or 3 feet, and it has light pink flowers as the season goes on. So you'd harvest it when it's in flower. That's generally towards July-ish, but depends on where you live. And so within that, you can make a tincture, which is the plant infused in alcohol, or you can dry it for a tea. So other uses outside of the bitter aspect is that it's considered an emmenagogue, which helps to bring on menses. So if for some reason your menses are delayed, note this is not an abortifacient. So if your menses are delayed due to, being pregnant, don't try this and expect it to work. But if you've, say gotten off the birth control pill or other reasons for your menses being delayed, this can bring on menses. And another aspect of Motherwort is that, as you might ascertain from the name Leonurus cardiaca, it is helpful for the heart. So it's a cardiotonic to help strengthen the heart. It's also helpful for lowering blood pressure. So hypotensive, so if you have high blood pressure, this can be helpful. One consideration with Motherwort is that, here, let me show off my signs here. So Motherwort is also hypothyroid. So for some people with hyperthyroid, Motherwort could be used in a formula to help reduce the action of the thyroid. But then again, if you already have low thyroid, you might not want to use Motherwort long-term because you could slow down your thyroid function. And then last but not least, I want to mention for Motherwort is that it's helpful for anxiety. It's an antispasmodic to help reduce muscle tension. So, those times when you're really stressed and your shoulders are up, or you've just had some bad news and you're kind of freaking out a bit, Motherwort helps. Take a tincture. I will warn you that it's bitter. So keep that in mind as you decide how you want to ingest it. Does anyone have questions on Motherwort before I go on to the next plant? All right. They tend to grow in little clumps too, by the way. Also, I should make another disclaimer for people who know me. I tend to just go for all the disclaimers. The plants on this walk, as much as this is a, 2Rivers festival walk, these plants are not necessarily all river plants insofar as they grow near the rivers, see them near water edges. So Motherwort, for instance, you can see it in public parks. You could see it in your backyard. I find it along forest edges. So for instance, trees transitioning to grassy areas is also common. The bees love it when the flowers come out. Yeah, so another consideration with bitters is that aside from taking a bitters, either single herb or formula before a meal, you could just kind of chomp on a leaf. So if you're looking for that support with your digestive system, if you have Motherwort nearby, you could eat a leaf or two. So the goal is to get the bitter flavor on the back of the tongue because that's what triggers the central nervous system. Oh, look at this. Central nervous system to be able to stimulate the digestive tract. So this plant is Colts Foot. I know you don't know what we're looking at yet, maybe. but there's a sign. So with Colts Foot, it is an interesting plant insofar that it has the flowers come out before the leaves, which, as you might know, with most plants, typically the leaves come first. So last year I did this plant walk in June and the flowers were gone and the leaves were out. And I was here last week and there was a bunch of flowers. And this year, now there's just the flowers. So they do look a bit like dandelion. They don't usually shrivel up. This one's ending. So the flowers of Colts Foot have this sort of jagged edge to them, sort of thorny edge. There's another one over here. It's about to become a flower more so. I think I just turned upside down. Oops. Anyway, so these will turn into leaves. Let's see if I can find a leaf. Thank you all for your patience as I navigate the landscape here. Okay, here's a cute little leaf. So part of why it's called Colts Foot, botanical name Tussilago farfara, is that the shape of the leaf looks like a colt's foot. So that's an identifier. So when you're gathering this plant, it's more common to use the leaves. Some people do use the flowers and gather them. They can infuse them in honey. So for those of you who maybe know Latin, Tussilago or antitussive, as you might have heard, is a cough remedy. So that indicates that Colts Foot is useful for reducing coughing. So for instance, if you have a cold and you have a sort of dry spasmodic cough where you just kind of can't stop coughing and need to relax it, the Colts Foot as a tea can help you to have that reduction of coughing action so that you can get more sleep or just take a break from coughing. But as you might consider, there are times when you need the coughing. You know, if you have mucus and phlegm and you need to get that gunk out, then you don't want to suppress the cough. So that's a consideration for when you're deciding on herbal remedies and how you're going to support your body. To regain health is that you want it as a tea. Paralyzadine alkaloids, that's a tongue twister. And so those are a type of ingredient or chemical constituent in the plant, which are hepatotoxic, so they're a bit toxic to the liver. So if you take it for long periods of time, it can accumulate that toxin. Morella, in answer to your question, you would use the leaves in a tea. And so traditionally the leaves were harvested when they are smaller than the palm of your hand. So for context, these are my fingers, so they will get bigger. So obviously they will get bigger through the season and you'll see them. Colts Foot is actually a plant that grows along the water. So in this case, we have Colts Foot here and we are along the water edge. So Colts Foot is one of the watery plants. Motherwort is not necessarily, as I mentioned before. So when you're looking for it, you can see it later in the season. The plants keep growing, so you can even see it still when the goldenrod and the New England asters are out closer to September, and the leaves will be bigger than a hand. And that's how you can look for that. Does anyone have any questions on Colts Foot? And also, it's not a be-all, end-all of questions. You know, you can ask me at the end too. So let me know, and we will move on to the next plant for now. All right. Question of, can you use the flowers for anything? Some people will use the flowers instead of the leaves. They're not as often used, in part because of the short flowering season, in part for the leaves are more abundant. So yes, you could make a tea out of the flowers, but the leaves are more effective. So I hope that helps clarify that. Also, I maybe should have done a disclaimer of, I hope no one gets vertigo from watching moving landscapes, but doing my best here. Okay, so our next plants, these two are close together. So for Guelphites, our context is by the bridge here. So next one is Celandine. This one's greater Celandine. Yes, there is a lesser Celandine. So you might recognize this one from your gardens. It is considered a weed. Some people consider it a noxious weed. So part of the way you can identify it is that the stem is rather fuzzy. I'm not sure how well you can see that. This is why live plant walks are so much better, but we do what we can. So this plant will grow out to having yellow flowers with 4 petals. So those are going to come out here. And then later in the season, the seed pods are kind of, I don't know, elongated seed pods. And you can also recognize it by the rounded edges of the lobes on the leaves. So celandine is not a major, or it's not a more commonly used plant medicine, but I want to point it out because topically it's useful for plantar warts. I'm going to ask Beth to spotlight or pin me if full screen is not apparent. So I'm just going to interrupt.
Okay, can I just maybe jump in now? I do
Totally.
see this message about full screen, and there's another quick message for someone that I'll get to in a minute. Now, as far as I can tell, I've got it on full screen. Yeah, I've got it on full screen. Maybe Amani,
So,
you should be able to manipulate your own screen also.
To go from gallery view to speaker view.
So if you go to up to the top right hand corner, it says there's a little button that says view. If you go on there, you can switch it from gallery to speaker. That should help.
Thank you, Joan, for chiming in. So some people have it on full screen.
Great. And then let's see.
Yay.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We want to have everyone have an optimal user experience if possible. And we will edit that out of the recording. So, okay, we're good, Beth?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so here's the show and tell part. I mean, I guess it's all show and tell, but this part of the show and tell is with regard to the inner sap. So I was just talking about the topical use of warts, topical use for treating warts. So when you open celandine, it has this yellow milky latex in it, which, we'll see if we get the camera to focus. So at different points of the season, it goes from yellow to a bright orange. This one is not being super milky, and you're getting a lovely view of my thumbnail. But this part of the plant is doing a little bit more action here. If I can get my camera. So I think you can maybe see that there's some yellow going on. As blurry, oh, look at that, there you go. So that sap latex aspect is what you would put on a wart topically. And as you might know, sometimes plantar warts are pretty difficult to get rid of. So this is one option for a topical application. Another option for warts, by the way, cedar, eastern white cedar, Suya occidentalis, is also excellent, but that's not on our plant walk today. So if you want to hear more about that, you should come to more of my plant walks or research it. So further news about greater celandine, Chelidonium majus. Some other aspects, it is bitter to be stimulated for gallbladder flow. So for instance, if you have stagnation, that can help, but then if you have gallstones, you might not want to stimulate your gallbladder because you could cause a blockage. So not a super commonly used plant because it is more specific in that way about the topical use on warts. In answer to a question, yes, plantar warts. I don't know about all warts. Different warts have different causes. So I do know it is for plantar warts, and I can get back to you about if it's useful for other warts as well. Third and finally on this plant, it is useful for migraines when they are correlated to liver congestion. So if you have a migraine that goes from the back of your neck, the occiput, around the sides of your head towards the forehead, then taking celandine as a tea or as a tincture can help to relieve that because it relieves the liver congestion and then eases off the migraine. So that might be useful. Any questions on celandine? Greater celandine? Okay. Moving right along to burdock. I know, I just have to say it in funny voice because I love burdock so much. It's kind of on every plant walk. Okay, so this is burdock. Burdock is also known as Arctium lapa. So burdock is a biennial plant. So the first year it grows its, I'm going to table that question that just came in for a moment. So burdock grows in a 2-year phase. So the first year it's a little plant. So burdock, we all know burdock. This is the same plant that causes burrs, you know, those fuzzy round things that get stuck to your clothing. So this is a really first year plant. See how little it is? So first year it grows out in this rosette. These leaves come out to the side. They will of course get bigger. And then at the end of the first year, the energy goes back into the root. And then as the second year starts, it grows back out and then it sends up that stalk with the flowers and then makes the seeds. And then after it does that, it's basically done and dies off. So we can see this one is just starting, whereas this one is a little bit larger, you know, comparison here. And so this one would be the start of a second year plant. So when you're harvesting burdock, the most commonly used part is the root. So burdock root, you would harvest either at the end of the first year or the beginning of the second year. So thinking through that, as the energy of the plant, so at the end of the first year, after the first frost, the frost causes the energy of the plant to go back into the root. So then all the medicinal qualities are enhanced in the root rather than, you know, the energy going out in the leaves to grow or something. Similarly, as it starts the second year, the root still has the energy before it tries to grow more leaves and start its stalk and start to make flowers and so forth. So that's the reason for that time of harvesting. In terms of why you'd want to harvest burdock, there's a whole list. I will try not to overwhelm with all the info of why it's one of my favorites. So in no particular order, the root is high in inulin. As some of you might know, inulin is a prebiotic, so that can help with your digestive system and the gut flora. Also, the root is used as an alterative. So alterative is a word in herbal medicine for blood cleansing. So in that sense, if you have metabolic waste or other, I don't want to say impurities, but it just kind of cleans the blood, for lack of a better term. So within that, let's say personal example, when I eat too much gluten or sugar, then I start to get a bit of a rash and I can get some eczema. And the burdock root helps to clear that by cleansing the blood. So burdock is also a gentle liver support and a gentle kidney support. So in that sense, burdock is also diuretic. So diuretic as in diuresis, as in causing you to urinate. So to flush the system of toxins in that way. Burdock, therefore, with consideration of the rashes, is useful for psoriasis and or eczema. So when we consider skin conditions, as much as we see it on the skin, that doesn't necessarily mean that it started from the skin in terms of, you know, is it caused by digestive imbalance or allergies or other things with that. So burdock is fairly commonly used and more specific for psoriasis and eczema. And it is also a gentle bitter. So I personally don't consider that bitter. That comes out a bit more in tincture form. And in terms of how you would use burdock, one of the most common or more effective ways to use burdock is through decoction. So decoction is a word that means to simmer to make a tea, basically. So when we think about different plants, the thinness of a leaf is thinner and can be perfused with boiling water. Or you think of different tea bags and stuff. The leaves and the contents are thin enough that when you pour boiling water, it'll get through the plant material and it'll extract the stuff into the water that you're going to drink. Whereas if it's a root, it's so hardy that you can't just pour hot water on it because it'll not get through the very thick, strong root. So to simmer it on the stove will bring out the medicinal constituents so that the heat and the 20 or so minutes of boiling will pull through the root in that time to be able to get the medicine out into the water, and then you can drink it. So with that said, if you ground it up really, really fine, sure, you could probably do it as a tea, but generally roots and barks and the kind of thicker plant things are done as a decoction. So decoction, you'd take about a tablespoon of plant material to, well, it depends how strong you want it, maybe 500 mils of water, and then put it on the stove. So you have cold water to start and the plant material, and then you bring it to a boil. And once you hit a rolling boil, you bring it down to simmer, and then you simmer it for about 20 minutes, and then you're done, and then you can drink it. Or depending how soon you want to drink it, you can let it cool down and then drink it the next day. So burdock tends to be found in more rocky soil and or everywhere, as some of you might know from your backyards. So you can kind of see the different ages of plants, and it's a good one to map out to be able to harvest it later, to know ahead of time. So in this case, for Ontario here in Guelph, it's still early enough in spring. I just started seeing it come up about 2 weeks ago. So you could still harvest some, but as you can see, this energy is starting to really kick up to go into the leaves. So it's a bit too late for some, but you can make your own decisions on the plants near you. I think there's a question I need to catch on Celandine. So there's a question of how does it differ to greater Celandine? The plant of Celandine over there with the fuzziness was greater Celandine. So I'm assuming that that was just asking about Celandine. There are lots of reasons why burdock is different from greater Celandine. So I think that was that. If anyone wants clarification, let me know. Does anyone have any questions on burdock? It actually also tastes pretty good. You know, some things, they taste like medicine. You just kind of get through them and slug it back. But burdock's kind of tasty. And so in Japanese cooking, burdock root is known as gobo. And they'll put it in stir fries, and you can put it in soups, and you can basically just kind of eat it. I mean, it's not terribly exciting if you eat it raw, but it's got a kind of carrot parsnip type texture to it. So yeah, if any of you care about texture while you're eating. And also it is a taproot. So just be aware that when you dig down, make sure you have a shovel. This is not, I don't know, a short taproot kind of thing. So for instance, these ones, these cute little ones of a first year, there's not a lot of root to them. So it'd be maybe the size of a pencil. So you could do that, but when you're getting into here, that's gonna be at least a foot down, if not more. So just be ready for that. For anyone who doesn't see the chat later, Tanis just said, it is so delicious when Zipes makes it. So I keep wanting to have a tea party and invite people to come over and we'll all do some tea tasting, but COVID. So if anyone's interested, let me know. And I'm open to questions on burdock. I'm going to cross the bridge in the meantime. Or any other questions, you know. I appreciate the positive responses to the tea party. We go from bitter to diuretic. Well, maybe not diuretic during COVID unless I rent a porta potty. Okay, so our next stop, there are a couple plants here. See, you can see our cute orange flags. Question of what was the first term you used to describe burdock, inulin? Well, it doesn't describe burdock, inulin. Inulin is a constituent of burdock. I think you might be looking for the word alterative. When I was talking about blood cleansing might be an answer to that. Here we are at Plantain. I'm going to adjust the camera a bit more. All right, with my fingers, good view. So plantain, you might know, it is often in your lawn. This one is broadleaf plantain. They get bigger. It's still early in the season. I was really fascinated this year to notice that dandelion came out before plantain for the whole spring regrowth. So plantain, the broadleaf is Plantago major. The narrow leaf, which I will show you in a minute, is Plantago Lanciolata. There it is. Okay, we'll just show you now. So this is broadleaf. Okay, broadleaf, nice and broad, and then narrow leaf. Shockingly, has narrower leaves, also longer. So interestingly, the narrow leaf is a little bit fuzzy. I don't know how well my camera can focus. You can maybe see that a bit. And both plantains have a veiny aspect to them. So generally 5 veins. In this case, there's more than 5 for those of you who quickly count. So we have, if I could keep it turned over, the one on the outside, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out here. And so that's one of the identifiers of plantain is the veins that come with it. So if you want to kind of double check of, are those really veins? Which you can say in that voice. Depending how you pull it, you can see the strings come out. I think it works a bit better with broadleaf. So plantain and why it is so helpful to know. Topically, it's useful for cuts and scrapes. So it is antibacterial, which I think we all know that word well enough, straightforward. And it's also astringent. So astringent is to tone and sort of tighten. So to astringe, which I guess you might know that word given skin toner and astringency. So as an astringent, that means that so for instance, let's say you get a splinter and you want to get it out, presumably. If you can't get it out with tweezers, or you want help, or, you know, whatever it is, whatever reason you have for not getting it out mechanically, if you put plantain on topically, it can help to draw it out. So that astringency is a drawing, right? You think of that tightening and that drawing. So that also translates to plantain being useful topically for boils or acne, or an abscess. So if you have a tooth abscess, it can help to put plantain on to help to draw out the pus. So in that sense, how would you apply it topically? Well, one option is as a poultice. So a poultice is a plant used topically directly on the skin. So if you mash up a plant and slap it on your wrist, that's a poultice. Contrasting that, a fomentation, I just like words, so I'm explaining words. A fomentation is when you say make a tea, like a chamomile tea or something, and then you strain out the plant material and you just use the remaining water. And so that would be a fomentation because there's no plant material directly touching your skin. So in this case, you could even chew up the plantain, put it in your mouth on the abscess. Depending where you harvest it, you would maybe perhaps, remove these chunks of dirt from it. And the antibacterialness is also helpful. So another consideration, and why when I enter an area and I'm walking, especially with kids, I scout out for what plants are around. So plantain is super handy for wasp or bee stings. So bee stings are slightly different consideration because you maybe have to get the stinger out. But in wasp stings or ant bites or other, stinging things, if you apply a quote unquote spit poultice topically, then that both astringency helps to draw out the insect venom or poison or whatever, and it's antibacterial, and bonus, antihistamine action. So that helps with the anti-itch kind of thing. So not to say that, wasp bites are itchy, but mosquito bites are. So kind of insect bites in general can help in this case to draw out and do that. So as you're walking an area, whether it's a lawn or whatever, it can be helpful to know where the plantain is. Also, plantain seeds, you might have seen them, or maybe you haven't, but anyways, they grow a stalk and then there's these flower heads and seeds. And so those are somewhat similar to psyllium husks, which some of you might be familiar with as are sold commercially for a gentle laxative effect, or maybe not so gentle. I haven't used them, but I recognize the laxative consideration. So you can use these plantain seeds as a laxative if you feel like walking around harvesting them. In response to the question about doesn't the spit add bacteria to the situation if you're applying topically, not as much as you might think is the short answer. I can give you a longer scientific answer about the pH of saliva and other constituents in the saliva, but it's not so much of an issue. So I would basically just say go for it when you are chewing it. So the other thing with the poultice is that you want to mash the plant material. So if you happen to have 2 spoons to grind together, or a mortar and pestle in your back pocket of a really large pocket, or a Vitamix or something, you can just blend it. I'm not saying you have to chew it. This is not a mandatory chewing, but it's kind of the sort of emergency first aid consideration of this. So I think I said before, the plantain of the broadleaf and the narrowleaf are interchangeable. Let's do the pull test on this one? Watch it all not cooperate. See? So broadleaf, we get these little stringy hairs, so that can help confirm the plant identification. So there's that. Otherwise, I know, I'm just going to talk about plantain for the next hour. No, I'm kidding, don't worry. So it's also, plantain is a bit diuretic. So if you have cystitis or a urinary tract infection, it can help to increase urination to help wash out the infection. The antihistamine effect means that plantain is used sometimes in formulas for allergies or asthma to help with, hay fever, stuff like that. Also consideration of the astringency, and it's also vulnerary, so topically for wound healing. So even if you have a cut, to throw this on as a spit poultice or to include this when you make a salve, that can be a useful consideration. And some people also use it topically for hemorrhoids. And then last but not least on plantain, the astringent effect and the healing abilities within plantain make it useful sometimes for digestive formulas. So for instance, if you have leaky gut or just kind of need to tone your mucous membranes, Paul Bergner, who is the founder of the North American Institute of Medical Herbalism, uses plantain as one of the 3 key ingredients in a gut healing tea. And just to satisfy your curiosity, the other ingredients are calendula and peppermint. So plantain, calendula, and peppermint in an equal ratio. So that's plantain. Any questions from anyone else? So it grows in this rosette form. It is perennial, tends to grow in compacted soil. So it's not the easiest to try to start a garden of plantain to make a giant harvest. All right, moving along to Yellow Dock. I'm not making up a song, I promise. Okay. There are musicians in the group. You can make the song. Okay, so Yellow Dock, also known as curly dock, one of those plants with multiple common names, which is part of why botanical Latin names are so important. There's our number 6 sign here. Hold up. Okay, I'm gonna trust I'm again. I plugged that in. So Yellow Dock is a perennial. The botanical name is Rumax Crispus. So the crispus could help you remember in terms of the leaf edges being crispy, sort of. So that's one of the identifying features of Yellow Dock or curly dock, is that the edges are nice and curly and wavy. This Yellow Dock is not necessarily the happiest, as you might tell by the bugs eating it. And they don't usually have red dots. If there are red dots, which there might be one elsewhere, and if there aren't the curly edges, then it's probably bloody dock, which is a different plant and not necessarily the same qualities. So why do we care about Yellow Dock? Well, I know, I'm gonna be here a while too. Okay. So Yellow Dock, you typically use the root. So plantain we talked about, I hope it was clear, use the leaves from plantain unless you're wanting to harvest the seeds. So Yellow Dock, you harvest the root. And so within that, you'd want to harvest it later in the season. So after it has gone to flower and seed stalk. These are the remaining stalks from the previous year, which is, not the best view. So it has this upright branching structure, and the seeds are a reddish, coppery brown color. Yellow Dock is known for helping people to increase their iron levels. So if they're anemic, then this can be useful. Whoop, I think we just had a camera rotate. Okay, so the root. So in this case, one other consideration about how you take plants is how you want them to work in your body. So as you can imagine, alcohol extracts different things than water, and the amount you take affects things. So for instance, nettles, which we're not talking about today, but just as an example, nettles have an antihistaminic aspect. So as a tincture can be helpful, but if you're going for nettles for the calcium and the nutrition side of things, then you want a bigger volume. So if you're taking alcoholic tincture, you're not going to be chugging back a liter a day, I would hope and or guess. Whereas with a tea, you can totally take a liter or something per day. So when you're looking at Yellow Dock to potentially increase iron levels, you wouldn't want it in a tincture, you'd want it in a decoction. So One consideration about decocting yellow dock is that it's high in oxalates. What are oxalates? Well, as you may or may not know, spinach also has oxalates. And so these can increase kidney stones for forming kidney stones. So that's not to say you should avoid it. That's just to say you need to dry this plant to reduce the oxalates before you use it. Whereas burdock, you could decoct fresh. Other things you could decoct or use them fresh if you really want to. We can talk about that a bit more later in terms of the amount of different things. That was really technical. So if you have a tea, if you think about a fresh leaf that you're pouring boiling water over, how much can that boiling water get through that fresh plant leaf compared to how much can boiling water steep through a dried leaf, right? So typically you want things dried before you make them into a tea, but in some cases you need them fresh. Plants are very specific about which is which. Bigger conversation, ask me later. So back to yellow dock. So decoction, harvest the root in the fall, dry the root. Presumably you want to cut it up before you dry it. I think that's common sense, but you know, just in case, don't want you to be sawing through the root. So you can make a decoction, as we talked about, with simmering it on the stove to help increase your iron levels. Yellow dock is also high in, well, not high in, but it does have anthraquinone glycosides. It's getting a bit late in the evening. And so these make it have a gentle laxative effect. So that can be helpful if you are constipated, of course. And otherwise, it's also bitter. So you could use this as a bitter consideration, like as a tincture or as a decoction. And so in that case, this plant is also indicated for if you have sluggish digestion. So one of the things with bitters is that as it stimulates your digestion, it can also stimulate bile secretion, which then helps support your digestion such that it moves along with the bowels and stuff to get the bile stimulation going. So that's another way to have a laxative type effect, is to stimulate bile secretion. So that could be handy. Otherwise, yellow dock is really excellent as an alternative and helpful for clearing skin conditions. I know you might think there's some similar with burdock. It doesn't taste the same. This is not nearly as pleasant to drink, but it is very handy. So to clean up the blood, to help support the liver, get rid of metabolic waste. So one thing to consider with metabolic waste is if your kidneys aren't functioning and not able to excrete through urine, or if your liver's not functioning and able to excrete through bile, then you know what's left. Possibly that's why things have to get excreted through the skin if you have acne or other things, because your other eliminatory systems are not top notch. So that's part of why we want to support the liver, support the kidneys, so that the body can continue to function optimally. So that's kind of my spiel on yellow dock. Any questions? This one also tends to grow in lawns, in kind of wastelands. Yeah, they get bigger year after year. So keep an eye on those ones. We're gonna go over to mullen. So I am at this part of the river, wandering across this little field to mullen. Mullen tends to grow in fields, open areas, certainly not so much of a forested plant. Mullen is a biennial. I'm gonna try to not face the window. Isn't it so pretty? Look at how symmetrical that is. I mean, not to say that symmetry is more pretty than asymmetry, but there's just something beautiful about that right there. So mullen as a biennial starts with the rosette in the first year. So rosette being the basal rosette coming out along the base. And then this one being starting at second year, then they go up and create this flowering stalk, and it'll get 4 or 5 or 6 feet high. So mullen is Verbascum thapsus, that's common mullen. And it has these fuzzy leaves, very fuzzy. Nice, cozy, kind of makes you want to curl up in them. And mullen is, oh, and there's a friend in here, hello. So mullen is also typically considered a respiratory herb. So as a respiratory herb, it is intriguingly both expectorant, So expectorant helps to cough things up. So if you have phlegm and congestion, then this will help you get it out. So that can help in those conditions. And it's also demulcent, so it can help to soothe the throat, which is helpful. But as you might consider from these cute little hairs here, the hairs can be irritating. So when you are making a tea with this, so when you're using mullein, typically it's the leaves that are used. We'll talk about the flowers in a moment. So these cute little hairs, as you can imagine, are not the most fun thing on your throat. So when you're making a mullein tea, you want to have a very fine strainer, whether that's a handkerchief some people use or some of the really fine metal sieves, and different tea strainers for that. So not one of those mesh ball things that has large mesh holes. The reason for that is, aside from the unenjoyable throat experience, or less than enjoyable, I mean, I'm not going to dictate what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy, but if you consume tea without straining out the little hairs, it can be irritating to the digestive system, such that it causes diarrhea, just to irritate and cause that to happen. So be sure you strain it when you make the tea. So in that case, if you have bronchitis or pleurisy, or a cough and you need to help move things along, this can be helpful. It's also diuretic. So if you have urinary tract infections or need to increase urination, this can be useful. Some people use the dried leaves as a part of a smoke blend to help with asthma. So that can be useful. As the flowering stalk comes up, so the flowering stalk comes up in the second year, and I can maybe add in photos when it's not live on Zoom in a field. So the flowers are yellow at the top of a stalk, and we'll just pretend there's a stalk up here maybe. And so the flowers are used for infusing in oil as a sort of topical remedy for ear infection. So in that case, it's considered topical, even though it's going in the ear. It's not going in the digestive tract or in the blood. It's just going up to the ear canal. So that's why it's considered topical. So if you have an ear infection, you could use the mullein flowers infused in olive oil to put a couple drops in your ear to help clear up the infection. And some people will also use garlic. So, garlic that we use for cooking, to infuse that in oil to help with ear infections as well. So I'm going to ask for mullein questions. Anyone at this point? I will also mention this is used as a tea and a tincture. So kind of either or.
Zeiss, we have another question about, to go back to the yellow dock.
Yes, can we get the mullein questions first, if there are any?
Sorry.
I mean, we can kind of alternate. Maybe people have to take time to write them. I don't mean to rush anyone. Okay, we'll go for the yellow dot question. Thanks.
Can you see it there, or would you like me to read it?
I did see it flash on the screen. If anyone wonders why I paused talking, it's because I am going through questions. Okay, so question of what's a safe amount of yellow dock to take being an oxalate? So in response to that, a safe amount, there's not necessarily an unsafe amount, assuming you've prepared it properly. So if you happen to make a tincture out of the fresh root or start to decoct the fresh root, then you do need to be aware of it. If you're prone to kidney stones and you're wanting to improve your iron levels, you might not want to take, 2 to 3 cups a day for a whole month and just keep going. It's something to be aware of. I will double check the statistics of the comparison of oxalates in spinach compared to the oxalates in yellow dock, because I forget which is higher. So it's kind of, is yellow dock more of a concern compared to eating spinach? It's kind of all in moderation. So in more direct response, possibly, if you're taking a decoction of yellow dock and it's been dried before you're decocting it, you don't need to worry about it, is the short answer. The longer answer, yeah, I mean, if you are taking multiple cups a day for a long period of time, maybe it's worth considering. But there's so many factors about what causes kidney stones and dietary and or other processes. So this is kind of entering that territory of, we need to have a longer conversation about your body, your health, and your constitution to say if there's any contraindications about, hesitating on yellow dock. for that reason. So if you want more information, we can talk about that at another time. And in the meantime, there is not concern about oxalates if you've dried it before you are ingesting it. I'm going to take a quick detour to the sunset before the sun goes away. Also moving on to the next plant. So hopefully that helps answer the oxalate question. Was there another question after that, Beth?
No, just a comment. Somebody says that mullein for mucus and not dry cough. I'm not sure if it was a question or a
Okay. I can speak to that anyways. So it's interesting in that mullein is an expectorant to help cough things up, and it's also demulcent to help soothe the throat. So in that way, it's kind of useful in multiple cough situations. So I realize that's kind of an answer, non-answer. So yes, you can use mullein in a dry cough, but it wouldn't be my first go-to in a dry cough. It kind of depends. You know, sometimes it's a question of what you have on hand. You know, in an ideal world, use this, but if you don't have ideal world option, then yes, you could use mullein. So yes, if you have a dry cough, I would use mullein before Colts Foot, for instance. Wait, I think I just got that backwards. Yeah, if you have a dry cough, go for the Colts Foot before the mullein. Colts Foot is more soothing and helps to relax the dry cough. Thanks, Don. I should have also said this event had an interesting advertisement of it's an hour and a half in different places. I had planned for an hour and a half, and then it also said an hour sometimes. So we're almost done. 2 more plants to go, unless you guys want to talk to me for the rest of the night. I don't know. This one's Cleavers. Look at my cute son. Okay. Cleavers, so exciting. One of my favorites. I know, I could say that about all the plants. So Cleavers, botanical name Gallium aperine, and this is an annual. It has these little hairs on it. Still learning how to focus on Zoom here. So one of the common names for Cleavers is Sticky Willy, because if I can ever get my camera to focus, there's these little hairs on it that cause it to stick to you. So you might be familiar later in the year of the little balls that get stuck to your clothing. So if you walk through Cleavers, it can stick to you. So the texture, one of the identifying features of Cleavers, the texture of a cat's tongue. So as you draw your hands through it, it sticks a bit, which I don't know how good this demonstration is, but you can take my word for it and or find your own Cleavers. It grows in this branching whorl type format. So you can see how the leaves are grouped around the stalk in sections. So they protrude at various intervals in a nice circular pattern. And the stalk has sort of a square edge to it. My camera work is clearly not Hollywood level, but here we are. Anyway, so why do I care about Cleavers so much? Well, it's amazing for the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system, you might be familiar with if your tonsils get swollen, or consideration of cancer metastasizing through the lymph system, stuff like that. So if you have swollen lymph glands, that means there's stagnation and possibly an accumulation of white blood cells. Like, if you get a cold or a flu and your throat swells up with the tonsil swelling. So this can help to ease that swelling. So Cleavers, you can use as a tea, you can use it as a tincture, you can also juice it. So Cleavers is actually a really spring-specific plant. Contrasting, for instance, mullein, it kind of hangs out for a while. Also wanted to add with mullein, because it's a biennial, you want to gather the leaves at the end of the first year or beginning of the second. So again, considering where the energy is in the plant, so at the end of the first year, it's been growing leaves before it starts to send its energy back to the roots. And then the beginning of the second year, you want to gather the leaves before the plant puts its energy into the flowers. But that's a mullein comment. Back to Cleavers. Cleavers is an annual. So again, when we're thinking about harvesting mullein, it's kind of going to come back, You don't want to take all the leaves off of it and kill it, but it's got a root system that's going to come back. Whereas cleavers, it's an annual and the root structure is really little. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you out, give you guys an example. As my mom can attest to, it has a very delicate root structure. Let's try and give you some contrast here. So look at these cute little roots, you know, that's not a very strong root structure. So when you're harvesting cleavers, you can just kind of pull on it and gather a lot, but then that's that. Otherwise, if you leave, you know, let's say you harvest half of it or something, then you can leave enough at the bottom such that it can still grow seeds, and then the seeds can make more cleavers for next year. So when you're harvesting and you're thinking about sustainability, you're thinking through, how does this plant replicate? How does it make more of itself? And how do I not interrupt that cycle and try to allow it to continue to grow and thrive? So in the case of cleavers, you either would pull on them and take a bunch, but then leave a bunch, or as I prefer to do, to take some of the tops off and then have the remaining bottom portion be able to go to seed and make more for next year for the annual. So cleavers, I think I said Gallium-apiarine, that's the botanical name. You want to harvest it before it goes to seed, just in terms of constituents. So you can harvest it while it's flowering. It has these adorable little white flowers. I don't know that there's any with white flowers right now. This one's kind of starting very slightly. They're very little 4-petaled white flowers. You can hopefully see them sometime in your area. And yeah, so you can use it as a tea or as a tincture, one of the best lymphatic plants for supporting the lymph system. Also is a diuretic. So again, if you have cystitis, urinary tract infections, etc. And within that, because the diuretic consideration, it can be helpful for kidney stones or difficult urination. And so it's also alterative with the blood cleansing again. So if you have some internal condition like a rash or something and want to support your body with kind of clearing and reducing metabolic waste and so forth, then you can use cleavers. And so after it flowers and then it goes to seed, then it basically dissolves. So for instance, I'm not sure exactly how the season will progress, but like July, you're not going to see this at all. So this is a spring plant you need to look for before it goes to seed and then melts back into the forest. Any cleavers questions? This one also grows near waterways, so it seems to prefer damp soil. So if you're in foresty kind of shaded areas, so it will grow in the sun, but it's more common to find in shady, damp areas. So if you're on the hunt for it, which I feel like I almost always am because I love it so much, keep that in mind as you're looking around. Okay, that was cleavers. Lovely river. Does it taste good? Ahaha, good question. Especially if you're going to juice something, you want to know if it's going to taste good. So cleavers, in my opinion, taste a little bit like wheatgrass. Also, one of the things that people talk about with cleavers, and you know, there's how do you preserve plants to use them later kind of thing. Cleavers, some people will juice it and then freeze it so that you have that lymphatic tonic available later in the year, which kind of makes sense, you know, like freeze the juice. But I did that last year, and as Trudy can attest to, which some of you know who Trudy is, once it's frozen, it gets sludgy in texture. So I haven't done a lot of making juice and freezing things. This is landscape shots if you're wondering what I'm doing. Maybe we'll show the river instead. So it tastes great fresh. I think it tastes like wheatgrass. If you freeze it, just be ready for the texture change. And then it's more of a getting it down because you kind of chew it. It just tastes a little bit fibrous and there's not a lot of flavor once it's frozen. I'm not sure why. I don't understand how texture changes while things freeze, but it does. So still equally powerful as a fresh juice or an infusion. An infusion is basically a tea. Steeping longer, it's an infusion. Or using it as a tincture, but just it depends on what taste you prefer. And you know, do you prefer different textures, preserving things in the freezer, preserving things with alcohol, those kind of things. So I think it tastes fabulous. You could blend it. It's a bit fibrous, So if you just grab Cleavers and throw it in a blender, you could, but I haven't tried it, and it might be a little bit fibrous. So here we have St. John's wort. Well, here we have the sign for St. John's wort. Here we have St. John's wort. St. John's wort is Hypericum perforatum, botanical name, and it's not in flower yet, so it's not super relevant, but I really want to point out because it is such a useful plant that I want you guys to hopefully be able to identify it so you can see it when it's in flower, because it's harvested when it's in flower, typically. So, Hypericum perforatum, one of the easiest or most straightforward ways to confirm identification of this plant is the consideration of perforatum. So as you can maybe guess from that word, there's a consideration of perforate. And thankfully, it's still hopefully sunny enough to be able to show this to you. So if you grab a leaf and then hold it up to the sun, you can see the little holes in the leaf. And now I'm really just going to rogue here. Give me a sec. Or you can take my word for it. We'll see how it goes. Whoop. You guys crossing your fingers for me? Nope, it's okay. I still love you. Anyway, so if you hold this up to the sun, there are little holes in the leaf. And so that can help you confirm that it's St. John's wort, especially when there's no flowers and there's, you know, other weeds that kind of look like it. So when it's in flower, the flowers are yellow. Ooh. Thank you, Linda, for the indicator. Yes, I can see you. We're so close. Maybe I'll just throw in a photo in the edited version of this video. So the flowers are yellow and they, ooh, can you see it? I don't know. I can't focus the camera on demand, which is unfortunate. So the yellow flowers come out around June 21st, which is part of why St. John's wort, because June 21st is St. John's Day. That's part of that name consideration. And as for why I want you to know about this, it is one of the primary remedies for nerve pain. So whether for shingles or sciatica, other nerve pain like carpal tunnel. So topically, you can use this as a liniment of having it in rubbing alcohol, or you can put the flowers in oil to infuse in oil. And I just maybe need to focus on something else. So within that, you can use it topically as an oil or liniment to help with nerve pain. So you rub it directly on the nerve area. Is anyone else getting tired of me trying to focus on this leaf yet? Determination is the name of the game. But I should probably just show you the rest of the plant. Ha, you can kind of see it. Thank you, Tanis. Okay, all right, done. Okay. So St. John's wort, yellow flowers, you harvest it when it's flowering. It's really fascinating if you make the infused oil or the tincture or liniment. When you put the flowers in the oil or in the alcohol, the alcohol and oil or starts to turn red. It's the coolest thing from the hypericin in it. I'm not sure if the leaves have enough in it right now to make it red. Not so much. Also, guelphites, Anita Cazzola does amazing work with plant dyes and has used, I think, St. John's wort for this. And Varela, if you want to throw a link in the chat of Anita's plant work, botanical reclamation, if anyone wants to put the link in the chat, that'd be cool. I can't on my phone, but I have faith in you guys if you want to. So St. John's wort, topically for nerve pain, also useful for anti-inflammatory, relieving muscle tension. So for instance, if you have a tight neck or tight shoulders, something to rub it on topically can help to ease those muscles. It can also help to move lactic acid. So if you take it internally or topically after exercise and, you know, that lactic acid buildup, it can help to move that along to recover faster from that. As you've probably heard, St. John's wort is also an antidepressant. That's often what it's marketed as, St. John's wort antidepressant. So I'm not going to get into that a lot here. One of the considerations about using St. John's wort when you're using it internally is that it's metabolized through the liver with the cytochrome P450 pathway, which might not mean much specifically to you, but there are other medications that are also metabolized through the cytochrome P450 pathway. Why this is significant is that St. John's wort speeds up the metabolism of the liver with that pathway. So if you're taking a medication such as a birth control or an MAO inhibitor, so an antidepressant or something, and you start taking St. John's wort tincture, you know, those times when you go to the health food store and you've read about something online and you decide you want to try it, well, you could render your birth control less effective. So when St. John's wort speeds up that cytochrome P450 pathway, it means that your medication, if the medication is also metabolized through the same pathway, then you're getting rid of that medication faster. So your birth control, instead of, you know, you take the pill every 24 hours, then oops, it's actually not as effective because the birth control hormones have been out of your system sooner than you expected. So that might not be a pleasant surprise. So that's part of why it's so important to have detailed information about plants. And yes, I'm all for empowering people to use plants to care for their own health, but at the same time, being aware of the possible contraindications so as to not accidentally have things happen that you don't want to happen with your other medications. And part of why I have been through years of school training, because I want to know all the things. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, whether it's in the chat or reach out to me via email. I'm always happy for opportunities to talk and research and discuss plants and health. So St. John's wort grows in these kind of little bushes. So I'm not sure if this gives you context of size. It can get reasonably tall, up to, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet or so. And so when you're harvesting, you're just harvesting the flowers, but in the interests of aiming for the flowers, you can kind of chop off the upper aerial parts and do that so that you kind of accidentally, inadvertently get some leaves, but your goal is the flowers. So some buds that aren't quite open yet of the flowers and the flowers that are fully open, you don't want to collect them when the flowers are dying off. Like, this is a plant, if you miss it, it's just too late and you've got to kind of wait till next year. And so within that, it's kind of a now or never of, it's June, go for it, because this plant won't wait around. You know, other plants, oh, I'm harvesting the leaves. Okay, you know, there's some leeway of there's still leaves, but these flowers, you just kind of got to go out there. Also, I want to mention about St. John's wort as an antiviral. So in addition to shingles topically for the nerve pain, shingles is also an extension of herpes zoster. So, sorry, my brain's getting a little bit foggy as I'm getting cold outside. I should have worn more clothes. So herpes zoster being a virus. So St. John's wort topically can help with the pain, and also internally, topically and antivirally help with that. So I'm not going to get into discussion of viruses and COVID and St. John's wort, but just know that St. John's wort is also used sometimes for HIV treatment. I will direct everyone to look at the chat because Mirella Cazzola has posted about Anita Cazzola's amazing botanical reclamation project with plant dyes and different work with that. So you really should check it out. Even if you're not in Guelph, it's really cool to see the different plant dye and stuff she's done there. And I will be doing some work with her this summer around plant information and stuff. So that's kind of neat. Some people include St. John's wort in their formulas topically also because it's vulnerary. So vulnerary as in topically healing. So if you have scrapes or wounds or stuff like that. And yeah, but it's really, really stellar for nerve pain. So if you have nerve pain from sciatica or other pinched nerves or carpal tunnel or things, then worth checking it out. So that's our lovely St. John's wort. And that is, for better or for worse, the last plant I had planned on this walk. I could find other plants to talk about, I'm sure, but I will let you guys get on with your night. So there's our lovely sunset and our river. And if anyone has questions, now's a great time. Whoop, as I trip on my tripod. Or pleasant comments in the chat. Thank you guys. Dandelion, Linda, fine, okay. You know, it makes sense to talk about dandelion since it was in the ad of a photo of dandelion for this event. And then I just thought, everyone already knows about dandelion. Should I talk about it? Okay, we'll do a bonus round. This is like an encore, right? All right, all right. You probably don't need to see it. We all know what dandelion looks like, presumably. But in the interest of not looking at the river forever, dandelion, Taraxacum officinale. One of the ways some kids like to remember dandelion is that the leaves are toothed like lions, dandelion. So typically dandelion is used the leaves and or the roots. So the leaves are more diuretic. Quick answer, interrupting myself. Yes, the recording will be on my page. So the recording will be up on my website, most specifically www.plantingradiance.com/walk. I'm also hoping to put up just kind of a list of plant info. So if you want to look around at plants and not listen to the recording again, you can just get the Cold Notes version. So yes, the recording will be made available, and you'll also receive it by email because you RSVP'd. You are part of the elite club of RSVPers. So yes, thank you for asking. And back to dandelion. Now to continue with our previously scheduled programming. Dandelion leaves are more diuretic than the roots, but both are helpful for the liver. So dandelion leaves are bitter. You may have eaten them in salads. You may have seen them for sale in the grocery store, which I find so fascinating of, how many people weed out dandelion, how many people go buy them at the grocery store. So you can put the leaves in salads. For that said, you can also, for instance, put plantain leaves in salads if you want. They just don't have quite the same nutritional value or flavor. So again, with the leaves, we're getting the bitter effect of stimulating the digestive system, gastric secretions. The leaves are high in potassium, which for anyone who is on diuretic medication, a lot of pharmaceutical diuretics cause you to be depleted of potassium because you basically pee out the potassium. But it's neat that the dandelion leaves are so high in potassium that it's a diuretic, to help with the reduction of fluid retention and increasing urination, but it doesn't deplete your potassium levels. So that's pretty stellar. So the tea of dandelion leaves is more diuretic. To eat them doesn't necessarily cause the same diuretic effect. They're also high in vitamins and minerals, so good idea to eat them. You can decide yourselves about washing and safe harvesting practices. So the root is more specifically used for helping the liver. So it helps to stimulate the liver and support the liver. So for instance, milk thistle, which you might have heard of as a liver herb, helps to heal the liver, so to speak, whereas the dandelion root helps to stimulate the liver. So it's used in different liver formulas and help support the digestion. And it can be used in a decoction. Dandelion root is also higher in inulin, not necessarily higher than burdock, but I just mean it has a reasonable high amount of inulin. So, oh, and there's a little slug friend. First we got the butterfly, and now we get to slug. This is a full visitor experience. So yeah, so dandelion root, you can make a decoction. You can also eat the dandelion root if you want that bitter flavor in your stir fries. You can roast dandelion root. Some people use it for a coffee substitute. I don't drink coffee. I can't comment on that. Yeah, so good for liver support. And liver, given it cleanses your blood, we need to optimize our liver support. So definitely worth eating. You can eat the flowers. Some people make dandelion fritters out of the flowers. Some people make dandelion wine. I'm sure people have heard lots of things about different dandelion recipes, but all in all, great liver support, good digestive support, and yeah, worth harvesting. As you might know, it's a taproot, breakable in terms of the taproot, breaking easily when you try to harvest it. Yeah, does anyone have questions about dandelion? Did that make sense, or do you want more info on anything? Okay, I'm gonna stop crouching and staring at dandelion. All right. So, final call for questions. well, final ish, you can always email me. This is not a do or die situation, just for tonight, you know? Go for the iconic closing scene. Okay, well, I'll let the questions roll in, quote unquote. Thank you guys so much for coming. It was just a pleasure to be able to talk and share information. I hope it made sense. If it didn't, well, ask me questions or check out my website for more information for the more coherent, I'm not freezing cold and able to think straight version of discussing plants. I really appreciate your time. I will be doing more of these walks. I really look forward to doing them in person, but if COVID continues forever, I will do some online because I kind of can't not do them. I was thinking in early April, I'm gonna do a plant walk. And my friend said, are there enough plants to do a plant walk in? I was like, yes. But then shutdown happened. So here we are. So thank you so much for coming. My email list, you can join my email list, www.plantingradiance.com. I tend to send emails with some, I think, funny plant stories. You might not think they're funny, but I try to be engaging and somewhat entertaining while I talk about plants. So check that out. I'm trying to block the wind if you're wondering what I'm doing. This is not a COVID cover. This is a wind cover. Yeah, and I just really appreciate your time. So thanks. And I'm going to scroll through and say hi to everybody.
And thank you very much to Zeiss. It was very wonderful and extremely informative. I really, really enjoyed your presentation. I'm sure everybody else did too. Would you like me to stop recording now?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
Bye, Carrie.